Do you remember the summer of 1974? When audiences first stepped into the shadowy world of Los Angeles corruption? Where water was power and secrets ran deeper than the city's forgotten reservoirs? When a private detective with a sliced nose became the face of neo-noir cinema? Chinatown premiered on June 23, 1974, and immediately established itself as a masterpiece that would redefine the detective genre for generations to come. Directed by Roman Polanski and written by Robert Towne, this neo-noir thriller transported audiences to 1932 Los Angeles, where the California dream concealed a nightmare of greed, incest, and municipal corruption. The film earned 11 Academy Award nominations, winning Best Original Screenplay, and secured its place as one of the greatest films ever made. At the heart of this dark tale stood Jack Nicholson as Jake Gittes, the smooth-talking private detective whose investigation spiraled into a web of conspiracy. Opposite him, Faye Dunaway delivered a haunting performance as Evelyn Mulwray, a woman whose elegance masked unspeakable trauma, and lurking in the background, legendary filmmaker John Huston portrayed Noah Cross, perhaps cinema's most chilling villain. The supporting cast brought depth to every frame. Perry Lopez as Lieutenant Escobar, John Hillerman as the bureaucratic Russ Yelverton, Daryl Zwirling as the doomed Hollis Mulwray, Diane Ladd as the mysterious Ida Sessions, Roy Jensen as the menacing Claude Mulvihill, and Roman Polanski himself as the knife-wielding thug. But here's the question that echoes through time. What happened to these actors after 1974? Where did the next 51 years take them? Some would ascend to even greater heights, becoming legends whose names are synonymous with excellence. Others would face personal demons that rivaled any fictional darkness. And some, tragically, would leave us far too soon. It's now 2025. Half a century has passed since Chinatown first flickered across silver screens. The world has transformed beyond recognition, but the question remains compelling. Where are they now? Join us as we compare 1974 to 2025, examining the incredible journeys of the men and women who brought this cinematic masterpiece to life. From youth to age, from fame to legend, from life to legacy, this is their story, told across 51 years. Remember that moment when Jake Gittes leans back in his chair, fedora tilted just so, that knowing smirk playing across his lips? That image defined not just a character, but an era. In 1974, Jack Nicholson was 37 years old. He stood at a pivotal moment in his career. With his devilish grin, arched eyebrows, and that unmistakable voice, he had become the face of new Hollywood cinema. He already had Oscar nominations for Easy Rider and 5 Easy Pieces, but he wasn't yet a household name. When Chinatown was released, Nicholson brought Jake Gittes to life with a swagger that masked vulnerability. He wore tailored suits like armor. His hair was thick and dark. His face was unlined, full of youthful energy. At 37, he had the perfect combination of maturity and rebellion. He looked like a man who had seen enough to be cynical, but not enough to be defeated. The role earned him another Oscar nomination and proved he could carry a classic Hollywood film while maintaining his counterculture edge. In 1974, Jack Nicholson was a star on the rise, hungry, ambitious, and ready to conquer Hollywood. Today, in 2025, Jack Nicholson is 88 years old. 51 years have passed since he played Jake Gittes. The transformation is striking. The thick dark hair has silvered and thinned. The smooth face is now deeply lined with age. Those famous eyebrows are still there, but bushier and gray. The youthful energy has given way to the stillness of advanced age. The swagger has been replaced by the careful movements of an octogenarian. For years, Nicholson was a fixture at Lakers games. Courtside, sunglasses on, as recognizable as any monument in Los Angeles. But those appearances have become increasingly rare. Since 2010, he has largely stepped away from acting. His last film was 15 years ago now. He lives quietly in his Hollywood Hills compound, the same house he bought back in 1969. 5 years before Chinatown, he never remarried after his divorces. He has 5 children from various relationships. And his son Ray has become an actor bearing an uncanny resemblance to his father at that age. At 88, Nicholson has become reclusive. Public sightings are rare events that make entertainment news. When photographers do catch glimpses of him, we see an elderly man, often helped by assistants, moving slowly, a shadow of the vibrant actor who once owned every scene. His legacy is secure: 3 Oscars, 12 nominations, countless iconic performances. But the Jack Nicholson of 2025 is no longer the Jake Gittes of 1974. Time has done what no villain in any of his films could do. It has slowed him down, quieted him, turned the rebel into a recluse. The contrast is profound. In 1974, young, hungry, ascending. In 2025, old, satisfied, descending into peaceful solitude. 51 years have transformed the rising star into a legend at rest. If Jack Nicholson represented gritty determination, then Faye Dunaway embodied mysterious elegance. Where Nicholson was sharp angles, Dunaway was refined grace. Faye Dunaway was 33 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. She was at the height of her beauty and power in Hollywood. In 1974, Dunaway's face was flawless: high cheekbones, luminous skin, expressive eyes that could convey volumes without words. Her figure was slender and elegant. She moved with aristocratic grace. In Chinatown, she wore couture throughout, every outfit suggesting old money and impeccable taste. Her hair was perfectly coiffed in period-appropriate waves. She was the epitome of 1,930 seconds glamour filtered through 1,970 seconds sophistication. At 33, she had already been nominated for an Oscar for Bonnie and Clyde 7 years earlier. She was a major star, one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses. Chinatown earned her a 2nd Oscar nomination. She was, in 1974, at the absolute peak of her career and her beauty. Today, in 2025, Faye Dunaway is 84 years old. 51 years have passed since Evelyn Mulwray. The transformation is inevitable and profound. The smooth face has given way to deep lines and wrinkles. The high cheekbones are still there, but the skin has thinned and aged. The expressive eyes remain, but they're now framed by decades of living. The slender figure has changed with age. The hair, once so perfectly styled, is now white and worn differently. At 84, Dunaway continues to work occasionally, appearing in small independent films, but her appearances have become rare. The roles have dried up, as they do for most actresses of her age. The Hollywood that once celebrated her has largely moved on. She lives in New York City now, far from the Hollywood of her glory days. She has been married and divorced 3 times. She has faced health challenges, including a near-fatal lung infection that required a transplant. She has written her memoirs, reflecting on a life of triumph and struggle. The woman we see in recent photographs bears little resemblance to the glamorous Evelyn Mulwray of 1974, where once there was youthful beauty. Now, there is aged dignity. Where once there was Hollywood glamour, now there is the weathered face of a woman who has survived everything life threw at her. In 1974, Faye Dunaway was Hollywood royalty at 33. Beautiful and powerful. In 2025, she is 84. Still elegant, but largely forgotten by the industry she once dominated. 51 years have transformed the screen goddess into an elderly woman living quietly in New York. Her glory days far behind her, but her legacy secure. While Nicholson and Dunaway brought youth and beauty, John Huston delivered something entirely different: aged menace. The monster in grandfather's clothing. In 1974, John Huston was 68 years old. He was already a Hollywood legend, more famous as a director than an actor. He had made The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and The African Queen. He was cinema royalty. At 68 inches, 1,974, Huston was an older man, but still vigorous. He had white hair and a lined face, but his eyes were sharp and penetrating. He moved with authority. His voice was strong and commanding. He had the presence of a man who had lived a full life and knew exactly who he was. As Noah Cross, Huston used his age and authority to create cinema's most chilling villain. He played Cross with soft-spoken menace, making every word sound reasonable, even as he confessed to monstrous crimes. At 68, he had the gravitas to make us believe this man had built Los Angeles and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. In 1974, John Huston was still working actively as both director and actor. He had many more years ahead of him, or so it seemed. If John Huston were alive today in 2025, he would be 118 years old. Of course, that's impossible. John Huston died on August 28, 1987, at the age of 81. That was 38 years ago now. But only 13 years after Chinatown, he had emphysema from decades of smoking. His health had been declining for years. He died in Rhode Island, fighting pneumonia that his weakened body couldn't overcome. So the comparison here is stark. In 1974, John Huston was alive, working, creating. Still vital at 68. In 2025, he has been dead for 38 years. He never saw the internet age, never saw streaming services, never saw how Chinatown would be rediscovered by new generations. He died at 81, which means he had only 13 more years after Chinatown. Not the long, quiet retirement some enjoy, but a relatively short epilogue to a remarkable life. His daughter Angelica Huston, who was 23 when Chinatown was released, is now 73 years old, herself in 2025. She has had her own distinguished career and is now older than her father was when he played Noah Cross. Time moves in strange circles. The John Huston of 1974 was a living legend, still adding to his legacy. The John Huston of 2025 exists only in his films, in our memories. In the flickering light of movie screens where Noah Cross still smiles his chilling smile. Forever 68. Forever menacing. Frozen in 1974, from the deceased legend to the living lawman. Though living only for another 3 decades after 1974, Perry Lopez was 45 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. He was a working character actor. Recognizable but not famous. The kind of face you saw constantly in 70s cinema and television. In 1974, at 45, Lopez had strong features, dark hair, an intense gaze. He looked every inch the police lieutenant, authoritative, world-weary, compromised. He had the face of a man who had seen too much and made too many deals with his conscience. He was in the prime of his career as a character actor. His Lieutenant Escobar was crucial to Chinatown's story, representing institutional corruption and the barriers Jake faces. Lopez delivered the film's most iconic line, "Forget it. Jake, it's Chinatown." In 1974, he couldn't have known that line would outlive everything else he ever did. At 45, Perry Lopez had, he thought, many more years of steady work ahead of him. If Perry Lopez were alive today, in 2025, he would be 96 years old. But he's not alive. Perry Lopez died on February 14, 2008, at the age of 78. That was 17 years ago. 34 years after Chinatown, he died of lung cancer in Los Angeles, the city he had portrayed as a police officer so many times. The comparison: in 1974, Perry Lopez was 45, working steadily, in good health, his career still active. In 2025, he has been dead for 17 years. He lived 34 more years after Chinatown, working until near the end, appearing in the 1990 sequel, The Two Jakes, reprising his role as Escobar one final time. But he's been gone now for nearly 2 decades. A man who was 45 and vigorous in 1974 is now 17 years in his grave. His death at 78 went largely unnoticed by mainstream media. No major obituaries. Just a quiet exit for a working actor who had done his job well for 40 years. Yet every time someone quotes, "Forget it. Jake, it's Chinatown," they're quoting Perry Lopez's delivery. In that sense, he's immortal. The 5-year-old actor of 1974 lives on in that one perfect line reading, "Even as the real man has been gone since 2008, moving from one deceased character actor to another, we encounter a man whose greatest fame came after Chinatown." John Hillerman was 42 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. He was still seeking his breakthrough role. In 1974, at 42, Hillerman had a distinctive look, precise features, thinning hair, an air of nervous energy. He played the bureaucrat Russ Yelburton with jittery intensity, a man always calculating his survival. At 42, he was a working character actor hoping for his big break. Chinatown was a prestigious credit, but it didn't make him famous. In 1974, John Hillerman was still largely unknown to the general public. One of hundreds of working actors in Hollywood grinding out a career scene by scene. If John Hillerman were alive today in 2025, he would be 92 years old. But he's not. John Hillerman died on November 9, 2017, at the age of 84. That was 8 years ago. 43 years after Chinatown. He died of natural causes in Huston, Texas, his hometown. Far from Hollywood, the transformation between 1974 and his death is remarkable. At 42 inches 1974, He was seeking fame. At 50 inches 1,980, he found it playing Higgins on Magnum P.I. For 8 years. He was a television star, winning an Emmy. When the show ended in 1988, he was 56 and retired gradually, moving back to Texas, living quietly until his death at 84. In 1974, 42 years old. Unknown, hoping for a breakthrough. At death in 2017, 84 years old. Having achieved television fame, then quietly retired for 20 years. In 2025, dead for 8 years. Remembered fondly by Magnum P.I. fans, but largely forgotten by everyone else. 43 years separated Chinatown from his death. 51 years separate Chinatown from now. The 42-year-old actor of 1974 became an 84-year-old retiree who died peacefully, then became a memory that grows dimmer each year. Another character actor. Another life that followed a similar trajectory from 1974 to the 2000s. Daryl Zwirling was 44 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. He played Hollis Mulwray, the principled engineer whose murder sets the plot in motion. In 1974, at 44, Zwirling had a solid, dignified presence. He looked like an engineer, like a man of science and ethics. Though his screen time was limited, he established Mulwray as someone worth remembering, someone whose death mattered. At 44, Zwirling was a working character actor with a steady career in film, television, and theater. He loved the stage most of all. In 1974, he was in his prime as a character actor. With many years of work ahead, if Daryl Zwirling were alive today, in 2025, he would be 95 years old. But he's not. Daryl Zwirling died on February 18, 2014, at the age of 84. That was 11 years ago. 40 years after Chinatown, he died of natural causes in Los Angeles. Having worked steadily until the end, the arc is clear. In 1974, he was 44 and working. He continued working for 40 more years, appearing in television shows and regional theater. At 84, he died peacefully. In 2025, he's been dead for 11 years. From 44 to 84 to gone. 40 years of work after Chinatown. Then 11 years of being remembered. Then gradually being forgotten. The four-year-old actor of 1974 is now an one-year-old memory, fading a little more each year. Finally, we come to someone who provides a stark contrast to all the obituaries, a survivor. Diane Ladd was 38 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. She played Ida Sessions, the struggling actress who triggers the plot by impersonating Evelyn Mulwray. In 1974, at 38, Ladd was beautiful, energetic, and on the verge of greater recognition. Her face was youthful, her energy boundless. She had a small role in Chinatown, but that same year she would be nominated for an Oscar for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. At 38, her career was ascending. She had a young daughter named Laura Dern who was only 7 years old. Diane Ladd in 1974 was a woman on the rise. Still young, still hungry, with decades of work ahead of her. Today, in 2025, Diane Ladd is 89 years old. 51 years have passed since Chinatown. The transformation is remarkable. The 8-year-old beauty of 1974 is now an 9-year-old woman. Her face shows every one of those 51 years. Deep lines. White hair. The physical changes that come with approaching 90 blank. She has survived health crises, including a lung transplant. She has been married and divorced 3 times. She has experienced the death of her first daughter, but unlike all the men we've discussed, Diane Ladd is still here, still alive, still occasionally working. Her daughter Laura Dern, who was 7 in 1974, is now 58 years old and one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. Diane has become a grandmother. She has written her memoirs. She lives in Los Angeles. Not in obscurity, but certainly not in the spotlight. The contrast is powerful. In 1974, Diane Ladd was 38, young and rising. In 2025, she is 89, old but still standing. 51 years have transformed her from a young mother with a thriving career into an elderly woman watching her daughter carry on her legacy. She has outlived most of her Chinatown colleagues. The Jack Nicholson of 1974 is largely retired and reclusive. The Faye Dunaway of 1974 is rarely seen, and so many others are dead. Huston, Lopez, Hillerman, Zwirling, Jensen, but Diane Ladd endures. At 89, she represents survival itself. From 38 to 89, from youth to extreme age, from mother to grandmother, from rising star to elder stateswoman, 51 years of living when so many others have been gone for decades. Before we reach our final subject, there's one more character actor whose journey followed the familiar pattern. Roy Jensen was 46 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. He played Claude Mulvihill, Noah Cross's muscle, in 1974. At 46, Jensen was imposing, tall, broad, with a stern face and cold eyes. A former professional football player, he brought real physical presence to every role. At 46, he looked like he could hurt you, which made him perfect for playing thugs and heavies. His Claude Mulvihill was the film's physical threat, the enforcement mechanism of the conspiracy. At 46, Roy Jensen was the epitome of the working character actor who specialized in intimidation. If Roy Jensen were alive today, in 2025, he would be 96 years old. But he's not. Roy Jensen died on September 28, 2007, at the age of 79. That was 18 years ago. 33 years after Chinatown, he died of natural causes in Los Angeles. The trajectory. In 1974, he was 46. Strong, working constantly. He continued working for 33 more years, playing tough guys and villains. At 79, he died quietly. In 2025, he's been dead for 18 years. From the 6-year-old intimidating presence of 1974 to an 8-year-old grave, the strong man brought low canamos. Finally, we come to the most complicated figure of all. The director who appears on screen to scar his protagonist, Roman Polanski, was 41 years old when Chinatown was released in 1974. He directed the film and played the knife-wielding thug who slices Jake Gittes' nose. In 1974, at 41, Polanski was at a complex point in his life. He was a celebrated director, having made Rosemary's Baby and other acclaimed films, but he was also a man haunted by unspeakable tragedy. In 1969, just 5 years before Chinatown. His pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, had been murdered by the Manson family. He was still processing that trauma when he made Chinatown. At 41, Polanski was vital, creative, and living in the United States. He had dark hair, intense eyes, and the energy of a man at the height of his powers. His cameo in Chinatown was brief but memorable, and the film itself was a masterpiece. In 1974, Roman Polanski was a Hollywood director with a tragic past, but it seemed a bright future. Today, in 2025, Roman Polanski is 91 years old. 50 years have passed since Chinatown. The transformation is as much about circumstance as age. Polanski is now an old man, white-haired, deeply lined, moving slowly, but the more significant change is his status. He has lived in exile from the United States since 1978. Unable to return without facing arrest, in 1977, 3 years after Chinatown, Polanski was arrested for the rape of a 13-year-old girl. He pleaded guilty to unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor, then fled to France. Before sentencing, he has lived in Europe for 47 years now, never returning to America. At 91, he still makes films occasionally, but his legacy is impossibly complicated. He is both a brilliant filmmaker and a convicted criminal who fled justice. The Academy expelled him in 2018. His name is controversial. Some separate art from artist and celebrate his work. Others believe he should have been imprisoned decades ago. The contrast is stark. In 1974, Roman Polanski was 41, living freely in Hollywood, creating masterpieces, a victim of tragedy but successful. In 2025, he is 91, living in exile in Europe, unable to return to America. His legacy, forever tainted by his crime, 50 years have transformed the celebrated director into a controversial exile. The 1-year-old artist of 1974 has become the 1-year-old pariah of 2025. Time has not been kind to his reputation, even as his films endure. And so we've traveled from 1974 to 2025, tracing 51 years in the lives of 9 remarkable people. In 1974, they were all alive, all working, all engaged in creating something that would outlast them. Jack Nicholson was 37 and ascending. Faye Dunaway was 33 and at her peak. Huston was 68 and still vital. Perry Lopez was 45 and steady. John Hillerman was 42 and seeking fame. Daryl Zwirling was 44 and working. Diane Ladd was 38 and rising. Roy Jensen was 46 and strong. Roman Polanski was 41 and celebrated. Now, in 2025, the picture is dramatically different. Only 3 of the 9 are still alive. Jack Nicholson at 88, reclusive and retired. Faye Dunaway at 84, living quietly in New York. Diane Ladd at 89, still occasionally working. The 3 survivors, all in their late 80s, shadows of who they were in 1974. The other 6 are dead. Huston has been gone for 38 years. Perry Lopez for 17 years. John Hillerman for 8 years. Daryl Zwirling for 11 years. Roy Jensen for 18 years. All died between the ages of 78 and 84, living full lives after Chinatown, but ultimately succumbing to time and illness. And Roman Polanski, at 91, lives in exile, unable to return to the country where he made his masterpiece. 51 years is a long time. In 1974, Richard Nixon was president and would resign that summer. There were no personal computers, no internet, no cell phones, no streaming services. The world of 1974 is as distant from us now as the 1930 seconds Los Angeles of Chinatown's setting was from them. Time transforms everything. The young become old, the beautiful become weathered, the living become the dead, the celebrated become the controversial, the vigorous become the frail, the stars dim, the hair whitens, the faces line, the bodies slow down and eventually stop. But here's what doesn't change. The film itself. Chinatown in 2025 is exactly as it was in 1974. Jack Nicholson is forever 37 inches that white suit. Faye Dunaway is forever 33 and devastatingly elegant. John Huston is forever 68 and chilling. They're all there, frozen in time, forever young or middle-aged. Forever, in the midst of that dark story, the real people have aged or died, but their film performances are immortal. That's the strange magic of cinema, long after the actors have left the stage, long after their bodies have failed or their minds have dimmed, long after they've been forgotten by all but the most devoted fans. Their images live on. They continue to entertain us, to move us, to make us think. From 1974 to 2025, from youth to age, from life to death, from then to now, the journey of these 9 people reminds us that time spares no one. Butard d'Endure. Chinatown remains a masterpiece, and the people who made it, whether still with us or long gone, remain forever captured in that amber of celluloid. Eternally young, eternally performing, eternally alive. That is their legacy. That is their immortality. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 51 years. Until next time, remember, the actors may age and die, but the performances live forever.